Your client is stuck with emotional eating, or maybe you're stuck, you're a health practitioner, and the question is, what can you do about it? Now, emotional or stress-related eating, it's a big issue, and these habits are tied to emotions such as comfort eating during really stressful times in one's life, loss or grief. It could be losing a job, or it could be losing someone important, near and dear to you, or mental health struggles. We know depression is on the rise, as is anxiety. And breaking the cycle feels overwhelming because food serves as a quick emotional balm, and alternatives such as mindfulness take time to build and can be difficult. So, as a coach or a therapist, guiding clients towards their core values isn't always about prescribing answers. It's about igniting some really important self-inquiry. But how can we do that? So one way of doing that is we could go to some of the core beliefs or schemas. Let's say we could get really existential with this. I'm gonna read to you The Eternal Recurrence Revisited, Nietzsche's Shadow Dance. Imagine a demon whispers in your ear at midnight, as in Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Your life will repeat eternally, every joy and sorrow identical. But twist it deeper. Picture yourself as a shadow dancer in an endless hall of mirrors, where each reflection is a past choice echoing forward. The question is, if you knew that this moment, with all its mundane aches and fleeting ecstasies, would occur forever without alteration, what one habit or belief in your daily rhythm would you reshape to make eternity bearable? I mean, come on, that's beautiful, that's poetic and helpful to some, but how does that work for someone practically? Back to the eating relationship with emotional eating. How can we work with that? I'm going to try and go through a more practical way. So we could do an initial assessment. We could explore triggers via a food mood journal or the Dutch Eating Behaviour Questionnaire to map emotional connections. And I like to bring in a approach which is similar to what we call acceptance commitment therapy. It's an approach I've been developing called AEIOU. A stands for awareness, awareness in your thoughts, awareness in your emotions, awareness in your behaviors, and awareness in your body. What's going on? Awareness of what is the belief that sits under this, and can I acknowledge the belief? That belief might be I'm bored. The belief might be I'm just going through something difficult. The belief might be my life is never going to get better. The belief might be I'm not going to be okay unless this person changes, or I get this person, or I get that job, or I don't get that job, or I change my relationship with X, Y, or Z. It goes on, right? When it's happening, can we stop and really consider what are our thoughts, what are our emotions, what are our behaviors, what's going on with our body? So the E is about the embodied self. How do I down regulate my body? How do we use our body to support us? Often this is a threat activation, and what we're doing is we're turning down the amygdala and the sort of sympathetic activation. And what we're doing is increasing safety circuits through really prefrontal cortex, the big old part of your brain. So how can we do that? Because in stress, the amygdala is overactive, right? And the sympathetic body is on too much. And what we found is by increasing that big chunky part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, we gain greater control. So when someone is grounded or they're safe or they feel regulated, the prefrontal cortex comes online. The PFC can literally turn down the amygdala's alarm. And we as coaches and therapists, we can do that by grounding. We can ask someone to to ground by asking them 5 things they can see, 4 things they can hear, 3 things they can touch, 2 things they can smell, 1 thing they can taste. We can do it through different types of slow breathing or breath work. We can also do it through what we call attunement, the ability to help someone else down-regulate by being in their presence as a practitioner. And there's loads of other ways like titrated exposure and so on, but I just wanted to describe a few. This increases their vagal tone and their PFC activity. And, it's really well established in the neuroscience, and there's a lot of MRI studies to support this. So amygdala activation reduces, so the amygdala doesn't fire off, and the prefrontal cortex sort of activation increases, and this reduces those symptoms. We can bring the body back into regulation, and this is known an observable mechanism. Stress lives in incomplete defensive responses. It's an autonomic dysregulation, and you'll be familiar with the fight, flight, and freeze energy patterns. And also, it can change a heart rate variability and also muscular bracing patterns. So there's lots of things we can do, but for example, breath work again, yoga again, or if you know somatic experiencing, they all target the autonomic nervous system, not the story. And so what happens physiologically is the hyperarousal decreases, a lower sympathetic output, parasympathetic tone increases, more ventral vagal activity, heart rate variability improves, and that shows that there's good flexibility and safety, and muscle and tension patterns change. And also importantly, body memory becomes tolerable rather than overwhelming. And you may well have come across this idea of the window of tolerance or psychological ability to be more resilient. This is what we're talking about. And there's lots of studies confirming that somatic regulation changes autonomic patterns. And this predicts symptom improvement. Next, we go to the letter I. Where are we identifying? Where am I over-identifying? Where am I under-identifying with this belief? Okay. And how does this relate to, my personal philosophy of who I am or my values? It's so easy to over-identify in all of this that if I eat this, then we can go into a state of real blaming and saying this is bad and frame them as such. But we can reframe that and we can say this is an understandable response. And that way, we're also showing compassion to ourselves. So there's a lot going on there. Finally, in terms of the O, I say it's options, obstacles, and opportunities. And so what are alternative coping mechanisms to work with emotional eating? What's the practical stuff? It might be a distress tolerance toolkit with non-food rewards. So instead of having that amazing cookie that's soft and gooey and chocolatey, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 10 press-ups. Or for normal people who are not so inspired by press-ups, I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to call a friend, or I'm going to play a bit of piano. You see that we can change our response to that. And one of the things we can do is also really enjoy those alternative activities. Finally, the U is for understanding. And this is really about understanding everything that's going on in a global sense. Because the more we understand, the more we see, the more we can change. And it's a weird kind of change because change isn't so much the business of doing, it's actually understanding. And when we can see that, implicitly, we become more accepting of the situation, accepting of ourselves. Okay. Finally, we can also use with our clients ongoing support. So, these weekly sessions initially, tapering skills as they build, and even encouragement and accountability, but in a kind and compassionate way. So I wanted to approach this in a slightly different way from a coaching perspective that might be helpful for you as a coach working with clients with habits, especially around emotional eating, that might be unhelpful.